welcome to Poets Watching Movies. My name's Courtney. I wrote a book. I just don't want to mark these down. I wrote a book about movies. I'm a filmmaker and a poet, and I was writing this book, and when I was writing it, I was so excited because I saw that all of these other poets and writers that I like were also writing about movies and had movie books either coming out or one, John Yau's book that I just heard about from my friend, Courtney, who's a painter, and she was like, I heard John Yau is writing this incredible book about movies, so I'm really happy to have us all here together in the same room reading from movie books. And yeah, I had a couple of little things I wanted to say. So I was reading all these books and realizing like they're about movies, but they're kind of all about like interpersonal relationships, different kinds of interpersonal relationships. Like mine is about filmmakers that I collaborate with, and also like friends and the children I take care of. And like in some of these other books, we have relationships with parents and friends and lovers and mentors. And I think it's interesting that sometimes like people talk about watching movies, like being a movie watcher is like this escapist thing, but I think actually, for me at least, it's like it sharpens and it's sort of a place of focus for a lot of like my relationships and things. So I want to let the poems and poets speak for themselves about movies, but what we're going to do is I'll read a very short excerpt from my book, and then we'll hear from Steck, who has this book, A Place Beyond Shame from Wonder, which I love. Laura Paul has Film Elegy, which is from Problem Press. Marie Buck and Matthew Walker have Spoilers, which is on Goliath, and these are all recent titles. And then John Yau, who will be reading from a forthcoming book about every...
That's not even forthcoming.
Well, it's not, it's pre-forthcoming. Actually, this is an exclusive preview of a pre-forthcoming John Yau title that's untitled so far, about movies.
I've actually never read from it either.
I know, I'm like truly so excited for this. So about every movie that you watched and talked about with John Ashbery. I'll get started with this excerpt from a movie, my book, which is from Lavender Ink here in New Orleans. You all probably heard of it here this week. From my mother, I learned a new way of watching movies that I've come to call the kaleidoscopic method. As an adult, the way I most often spend time with my mother when I visit her quiet little house on a block of Biloxi, Mississippi that has been otherwise abandoned since Hurricane Katrina is by watching movies together in her bed from morning to night. Sometimes I nestle my head under her arm and rest my head against her breast while we watch. Often she sleeps and I'm the only one watching. Because she falls asleep so easily, and because she truly does want to watch the movie, when she wakes up, she decides whether she wants to just keep watching from wherever it is, or if she wants to rewind the movie so she can piece it together. It often goes like this. Start a movie, watch for a while, fall asleep for a while, watch some more. After a while, go back to the beginning, because though you've tried, you can't figure out what's going on with this one character. Did someone die? You start the movie over, but after a while, this time after having seen a bit more of the movie from the beginning, you fall asleep, and sleep for much longer. This time you wake up as the movie is resolving and the characters are on their way to finding peace, perhaps. Still feeling like you haven't really seen the movie, because though it's now noon and you started this viewing just after breakfast, and though you've seen a lot of the movie in a strange order, you really haven't quite seen it yet. This time you start in the middle. You see parts of the movie you've never seen before. Inevitably, you fall asleep. You wake up later, you ask your daughter some questions and understand for a while, but something happens. You need clarity. You rewind it a bit, watch a bit. This could go on forever if you wanted, which is one of the many beauties of kaleidoscopic movie watching. This winter, we watched Misery, starring Kathy Bates and James Caan in this fashion. While we watched, I tried to keep track of my mother's experience of the film. For her, James Caan's injuries came and went. The car wreck that incited the plot had happened and then had not yet happened. He finished the novel, smoked his cigarette, and had his champagne. Shortly thereafter, he had not yet begun writing. After his ankles were hobbled by the woman who held him hostage, he met the woman, his ankles intact and healthy. The woman was alive, she was dead, she was alive. My mom said, I thought she died. She did, but later, I replied. She nodded and kept watching. She did die, but later. In this way, my mother experiences narrative time in new and interesting ways. Now we'll hear from Ed Steck.
Can you hear me? The moon is a disk grinding night perpetually. In lunar grind shards, slivers of refined illumination pour through Venetian blind slits. Corner all your omens into shining moonlight. In moonlit omen corners, the world sits perched at curved light's edge. Time turns frozen cycles in these shadows. 90 minutes, 146 minutes, 86 minutes, sequestered minutes permit the viewer to glimpse a true illusion of dissociation. And illusions, pleasure absolutely, welcome excess absolutely. Serve this delicious sentiment. I watched Witchboard 1986. The stock quality of sexual fantasy took a trivialized manner, half fueled by the ineptitude of service and the unreachable fathoms of self-deprecation. The film, entirely composed of erotic daydreams and nocturnal fantasies, slips quotidian anxiety into the inescapable barriers of our subconscious. The dullest masturbatory wanderings. Homer, the Latecomer, 1971, is an example of a storefront theater grinder, a cheaply produced, expendable film reel meant to satisfy the lucrative needs of occupying time and collective fantasy. A storefront theater operated from dusk till dawn, reeling out a continuous stream of adult films and loops. Astronomical night. The morning, Frozen in the morning. I watched Frozen Scream, 1975. I watched Brain Damage, 1988. Somewhere deep in the water of your hallway, splashing like a blue detergent tide against matted shag. Death corners ourselves in the struggle to maintain a place of stability. Debt, power, employment, profit, status, love, rent, property, family. Memory is the only sight after death. A new grave, an old grave. The dirt is fresh with each visit. It carries new particulates to sift in your hands or nudge with your fingers. A grave is an abstraction of memory, a physical sight of memory displaced by the emotions, colors, touches, glares, screams, and glances of remembrance, rendered stone-like with front-facing data, name, year of birth, year of death. A disc is a memory. Escape from the Insane Asylum, directed by Felix Gerard, 1986. Free on a Meat Hook, directed by William Girdler, Studio One Productions, 1973. Through the Looking Glass, directed by Jonas Middleton, Mastermind Productions, 1976. Kamikaze Hearts, directed by Juliet Bashore, Legler Bashore, 1986. Pain Mania, directed by Phil Prince, Avon Productions, 1983. A Cat in the Brain, directed by Lucio Fulci, Executive Cine TV, 1990. Taboo, directed by Curdy Stevens, Dark Enterprises. Flower of Flesh and Blood, directed by Shimino Psy Enterprise, 1985. Ozone, The Attack of the Redneck Mutants, directed by Matt Devlin, Donna Michelle Productions, 1986. Curtains, directed by Richard Chupka, SimCon Limited, 1983. Thank you.
To share some of my general observations and thoughts on film and splice it with some of the poems from my book. So my book, Film Elegy, came out last fall, but I wrote it in the fall of 2022 after a filmmaker I worked for died. Her name was Amy Halpern. She was largely an experimental filmmaker who made about 40 films on 16 millimeter mostly, but she also worked in the traditional film industry in LA, and you may have seen some films she worked on, such as Tremors and Alien Resurrection. I had already been thinking a lot about the end of film as a physical medium before 2020, before the pandemic, but especially then with the shutdown and witnessing the specific phenomenon of cinema spaces closing down at that time, it felt much more pressing to start to formulate some of these ideas into a book. One of the ways I write about it in filmology is like this. A graveyard scene, one sappy and melancholy, not the wild wave of raving, of grief and madness, of the loss felt by the lack of theaters, of the theater closures, our porn palaces, of our grief and madness. Even though I wrote the book in 2022, a lot of thoughts have kind of swirled and been edited in and out and around this whole presentation of the text. In 2023, I hosted a premiere of a documentary on the poet Ruth Stone with Diana Marie Delgado at a cinema that had been around for decades but recently got displaced by their landlords. It's a largely volunteer-run cinema space, and more of these spaces are popping up as we're seeing kind of general exhibition collapse. I think that's something that I'm interested in, the linkage there between film and poetry and writing and publishing and all these ways we navigate how work gets presented. When I was at this premiere, I met a very young theater volunteer in her early 20s who, in our discussion, it came about that she had watched 1,000 movies in the year 2020 during the shutdown. To which I did exclaim, "Oh my God, Lily, are you okay?" Because I wanted to make sure she was, had the things she needed. But she just explained to me that, she didn't have a job, she didn't have much to do except keep herself, isolated and safe, and would just kind of watch 2 or 3 movies a day, entirely streaming, and for the most part by herself. So this was a markedly different experience than I had kind of come to know cinema through. I went to film school at UCLA, and I was in LA from 2010 to 2020, and my experience in that decade of film was largely watching films on 35, 70, or 16 millimeter in physical cinema spaces with people and all the delights and frustrations that come with that. The coughing, the kissing, the crumpled plastic bags when someone snuck in fried chicken to eat during a double feature. I do miss it, I have to say. But as I wrote the book, I was trying not to fall into a trap of nostalgia, especially in my kind of early film experiences now 15 years ago. There was a big generational gap that I was seeing at the time, with a lot of older filmmakers really just completely mourning the lack of kind of the physical medium coming forward, and I didn't feel like it was nuanced enough, which is also a lot of my impetus in writing filmology. I think that it's just completely misguided to look at it as a binary, and what I would argue for digital, like our wonderful films that Courtney Bush makes, is that digital allows underrepresented folks to express themselves and represent themselves in ways that largely have been left out for 100 years of image making. And I'm very, very interested in making sure we remember that this is a Western image making technology that is dependent on exploitation, on a material and kind of systems of labor. It required exploitation. I would argue that in film elegy, I'm not working in a phrastic mode whatsoever, but instead the only detailed descriptions I'm giving here are of the wording machines of industry that destroy artists, even as they claim to exhibit art. This is one of the ways I talk about in the film. It's a film. It's a film. If you've seen it, you're watching a film. I don't know what it is. It's a book, it's a film, it's whatever you want. I caught the tail end of an already dead zombie film era where the old ones would lament, nitrate, and it got under my skin and lit me on fire and poisoned my air and taught me about unions. Another thing I think is worth mentioning that is documented in maybe not the most obvious way in my book is that I started working in the film industry basically at ground zero of the Me Too movement. So that was, as a young person, a very interesting firsthand experience that I had, that I was in the center of an industry that then became a national conversation. And I don't want to say that those conversations were unique to the film industry, but it was a very different experience to be in those years. And that also is a major shift that, there is a kind of pre-Me Too era that I don't think we're ever returning to, and thank God in some cases. One of the ways I write about this in the book is like this. In the century of the American horror movie, the ones that make money, the horror makes money, the horror is cheap to film, the horror is plentiful, the horror of the casting couch is the background. I actually have a forthcoming book this fall, which makes Courtney and I classmates. It's called Total Art. It has film references in it, but it's more encompassing than that. And now thinking about the two books, I think as I reflect on film Elegy, I'm really interested in how we can, through text, document an aesthetics of exploitation. And I also see the text as a place of a possibility of how we create aesthetics that aren't dependent on exploitation, and this is something that's very important to me. I'm very curious, not only in the past and what film has been, but what comes next. I think that was part of the reason I needed to mourn not only a person or a place or a medium, but to put some of this stuff for rest, to rest for good. There's things we don't want to carry forward. What we make of this destruction remains to be seen, though. I write about film as a document of time, both past, present, and future. I write about film as an event. I write about film as a machinery of empire. I write about film. I can't stop writing about film, and I can't stop writing. I'm concerned about these things because people write about film as art and entertainment, but it also functions as a site of national propaganda and control and white supremacy. So right now, I see this breaking down, for good and bad. I'm breaking down, our organizations are breaking down, the film strip, the celluloids, the plastics, the microplastics are breaking down into their smallest, most disorganized parts, the cell, the single cell, the frame. What we make in these ruins of these institutions, this art, this machinery, these publishing systems, these failures and systems of exploitation still remains to be seen. One of my favorite lines in the book is this: I wanted to turn my grief, my suffering, into a non-Hollywood production. I also like this one. I mourn film and cinema. I cry tears of lubricating fluid for the machines of our projections. I am an idealist, but I'm also a structural materialist. And so I like to address that, as idealist as we can be, and all of our projections that go on the screen, there's also a danger in not remaining tied to the ground. I wish for you to think carefully about these things as you try as best you can to navigate these systems. I'm so thankful to my fellow panelists for creating such moving works of art about this form and for making me think deeply about these things. I just wish for you to take care of yourself and others during these times, and may better systems of art exhibition emerge. Thank you.
How's that? Yeah, can y'all hear me? Okay. So Matt and I are going to each read like a very short excerpt from Spoilers. And the book is about movies and love and death with the pandemic kind of floating in the background too. Courtney invited us to say something sort of conversational about the books or about writing about movies. So just to begin with that, yeah, one thing I noticed just about the books on the panel in general, and yeah, we don't know, I haven't gotten a chance to hear John's work yet, but yeah, the existing books seem to be looking to movies to allow us to work something into poetry that doesn't always exist, or doesn't necessarily, the poetry doesn't lend itself to. I think of both lyrical poetry and various experimental modes as orienting around like not necessarily a large narrative arc. So holding on to discrete specific moments in distinction to something like a novel or an epic poem. And we all seem to be using movies as a sort of keeper of a narrative arc. So about the idea that like this could tell you the entirety of all life. There's sort of an elegiac element to like I think all of the work. And yeah, it seems like a placeholder for a sort of human fantasy about being able to view oneself or others as a whole person at once, and to sort of ask questions like, what happens next, or how does it all end? Even while the books also are very much oriented to paratactical and destructive formal strategies. So it seems to be like, all of us seem to be like reaching for being able to be like, to understand plot and to understand something about the totality of a life, while using the kind of tools of experimental poetry to like have something more collage oriented or assembled at the same time. So I was really excited to read everybody's book, and there are a lot of synchronicities, and I was like, what is this? So yeah, Matt's gonna read first, and then I'll read a little bit from the book too.
Before sunset is sappy, and yet there's a faint edge of grit to how things play out, enough to make it feel just real enough to be moving. And in fact, I'm mildly embarrassed by how gutting I find it the first time I see it. It's like at the beginning of Yvonne Rainer's Journeys from Berlin, 1971. We watch it on J.P. and Amy's couch, me keeping an eye after their cats, you slipping in and out of sleep, your head in my lap, relishing the idea of getting away with something, as you put it, meaning falling asleep in a situation where you're supposed to be awake. In Rainer's film's opening voiceover monologue, we hear a young girl speak of a strange occurrence, of getting shivers down her back when she hears a patriotic song at an assembly. She realizes this is in fact a recurring bodily reaction that she has when she hears stories of bravery or high emotion. But these cascading chills don't come without resistance. She says, I really fight against them because basically I reject such stories for their contrived nature and unreality. Intense drama is always so removed from my own life that it leaves me with an empty feeling. But then what in God's name do these damn shivers mean? And despite my own resistance, that final sequence of Before the Sunset is among the most affecting of any movie scene to me in its capture of the feeling of love. The way it's shot through with laughter and chants and sorrow. Antonioni says that he classifies love as a disease, a condition that one must suffer through, a state of being that's inextricably linked to pain and sadness. In my late teens and early 20s, this notion seemed so profound, so completely in line with my limited and undercooked experiences with romance. And I can still empathize with Antonioni, and with my teenage self too, though now I'm less skeptical of love and more skeptical of Antonioni's self-serious fatalism. But it's true that falling in love with someone, feeling like you can't live without them, is always undergirded by the inevitability that one day you will indeed be forced to live without that person, or they'll be forced to live without you. Spoiler, whether the love fades, the relationship fails, or the body succumbs to death, the final endpoint of love, whether mutual or unrequited, will always be grief.
We sit outside of a coffee shop, and I explain an old horror movie I watched. A scene where a creepy old woman interrogates the young, beautiful heroine about her fancy clothes. Fine stuff, she says, but it'll rot. And then the old woman, looking droopy and aged, pokes at the young woman's chest, at her glowing skin, at her body itself. Finer stuff still, but it'll rot too. As I explain the film to you, we also overhear someone a few seats away singing her dog song to her dog, describing the dog to itself in its specificity. Shiny yellow body with reddish highlights, reddish head, a lovely coat, she sings. I trail off in my description of the film, but don't want to be too obvious. Later you say, I've never heard that before, meaning someone singing an intimate song to their pet in public. It is good to describe things, to describe the person to themselves, to describe the dog to the dog as a way to show love, to praise its shiny coat, to reassure someone that you see them, that you do not think of rotting when you see them. They make you think of something else instead. So that what is described is going beyond one's body. How was your day? We've asked each other each night for 2 years now. How was your day? How was yours? Even if the day makes me think of rotting, telling it to you just makes me think of you.
So the book is called That Blameless Country, going to the John Ashbery, that phrase, that glorious country comes from Ave Maria, the Franco Harapan. And this is the preface, a little introduction. One of the things I learned from John Ashbery was to be myself, especially when it came to movies, the subject we most talked about. He showed me that I could be a fanboy because he was one. He was never embarrassed about his enthusiasms, which ran the gamut from the campy science fiction and badly made horror movies of Ed Wood to the low-angled stationary camera of Yasukiro Ozu. Though he was a shy man, he kept a lot to himself. He was not afraid to be silly. John and I talked a lot about movies, directors, actors and actresses, cameramen, everything having to do with making a film. He once sent the VHS of Wood's Orgy of the Dead in 1965, starring strippers in a graveyard, and guaranteed it was, quote, in pristine condition. Another time, knowing I was interested in Yellowface and all the actors and actresses who played Asians in films, he sent me a book on the subject that had been sent to him. When I was doing research on Anime Wong, I met a man at a movie memorabilia fair who published a bi-monthly newsletter about minor Hollywood stars from the silent era. It consisted of short articles summarizing the subject's career, where they were at the present moment, often in an assisted living facility, and included their filmography. John was very happy that I got him a 2-year subscription and clicked, "Do you think you'll ever run out of material?" John couldn't get too much from films. He was endlessly fascinated by those who lived in what his friend Frank O'Hara's Ave Maria called the glamorous country. This book is about the adventures that John and I had while watching and talking about movies and different rabbit holes that I discovered and scurried down. So that's explains something. What? I'm just going to jump in. I guess one of my inspirations was the book Joe Server of Frank O'Hara's digressions on Frank O'Hara. So this is going to be digression. Vermont Notebook and Self-Portrait of the Convex Mirror, both published in 1975. There are lists in both books. In Grand Galop, which is in Self-Portrait of the Convex Mirror, we read, "Today is Monday. Today's lunch is Spanish omelet, lettuce and tomato salad, jello, milk, and cookies. Tomorrow's sloppy jello and bun, scalloped corn, sweet tomatoes, rice pudding, and milk. One of the lists of Vermont notebook is made up entirely of names not in alphabetical order with no context provided. Maggie and Clyde Newhouse, Egon von Furstenberg, Bill Glass, Rex Reed, Pauline Tregear, Betsy Virdakopoulos, Ann Kempner, Jesse Rayner, and Arthur Lane Cohen. I remember thinking that famous people that I had never heard of that was unlikely to ever meet had memorable first names like Egon, Clyde, names Ann, and Jesse. I knew they were famous, but for the most part, I had no idea what they were famous for. As I had not come across almost any of these names before, I assured that none of them were poets, and suspected none of them read poetry. No matter how many times I read this list, I never figured out the motivation or the criteria for making this list. The one name that I did recognize was Rex Reed, the smug, viperous film critic who never lets you forget his prejudices because he's sure you're interested in them. This is how he prefaced his interview with the Italian film director Michelangelo Antonioni, published as the first piece in Do You Sleep of the Nude. If there's anything more excruciating than sitting through a Michelangelo Antonioni film, it's sitting through a Michelangelo Antonioni interview. Like a scene from one of his movies, the experience is a symphony of helium. Blow Up 1966 was many things, but excruciating wasn't one of them. When I moved to New York, I found that Reed's reviews appeared regularly in the New York Post, and later the New York Observer. This is what Reed wrote in the New York Observer about Chan D. Park's Old Boy 2003. What else can you expect from a nation leaned on kimchi, a mixture of raw garlic and cabbage buried underground until it rots, dug up from the grave and then served in earthenware pots, sold at the Seoul airport souvenirs? Reviews such as this do not bother me, because in his hyperbolic ranting, it's clear that Reed does not know anything about Korea, which is different than knowing something and acting like you know more than you do. In their article, Rex's Comedy, The Village Voice, April 5, 2005, Ed Park and Dennis Lynn pointed out that Reed's bold attempt to bridge through their film reviewing is hardly new. Research reveals that the cosmopolitan critic has previously blamed other exotic dishes for the collapse of various national cinemas. Park and Lynn cited what Reed wrote about Yao and Miyazaki's animated fantasy Spirited Away. No surprise coming from a people raised on chicken katsudon and incestuous gangbang of birded poultry and aborted chicks who form are cooped up in train cages waiting in their own feces. How did the vituperate Reed end up a team of fashion designers, Bill Glass, Pauline Tregear, Reading the Village Voice, I got interested in reviews and articles of the film critic Elliot Stein, and learned that he had seen King Kong in its original release when he was 5 years old. In the uncensored version, Kong partially addresses and teaches Ann Darrow, Fay Ray, an unemployed actress who's homeless because of the Great Depression. King Kong remains Stein's favorite movie. He saw it hundreds of times, eventually writing a seminal article, My Life with Kong, for Rolling Stone. In that article, he characterized the relationship of Kong and Aunt Anne as the, quote, most serious passion play ever seen on the screen. Stein was an aficionado who took reading seriously. When I learned that he moved to Paris in 1948, lived there for many years, and was a major inspiration for Susie Sondheim's Notes on Camp, I asked John if he knew Stein. John said, yes, I know Elliot in Paris. He's very eccentric. He was living in a hotel room with the smallest sink. I went there a couple of times. He was always washing one sock. I thought, is the sink that small? I looked at John and said, wasn't he just washing one sock at a time because the sink was so small? John looked at me incredulous. No, he was always washing just one sock. I told you he was eccentric. What goes on like this, I don't know, be one more year. I'll read this one. One night, John and I watched The Letter, 1940, directed by William Wyler. Leslie Crosby, played by David Davis, is married to Robert Crosby, played by Herbert Marshall. The rubber plantation owner is extensive land holdings just outside the city of Singapore. In the first scene, we see Leslie walking determinedly across the porch as she fires a pistol at a man who has just walked quickly out of her bungalow. She keeps firing at him even after he falls down the stairs and is lying on the ground. We learn that the dead man's name is Jeff Hammond. According to Leslie, the reason she shot him was because she tried to make love to me and she wanted to protect her honor. The real story, of course, is that Leslie and Jeff were having an affair, and then she got jealous when she learned that he had recently married a Eurasian woman played by Gail Sondergaard and was in fact never in love with her. But that crucial information about their affairs contained in a letter that is in the possession of Hammond's widow. Leslie's attorney, Howard Joyce, played by Jan Stevenson, learns of the letter's existence from his clerk, Hong Chi Seng, played by Sam Young. Seng drives the lawyer and his client, Leslie Crosby, who the widow in Chinatown. Sondergaard, who arches her eyebrows and frowns in the movie, but who never says a word, makes Betty Davis show her the envelope containing the $10,000 before dropping the letter on the floor. Refusing to touch the money, she hands the envelope to a helper who's smoking an opium pipe. This is the best role that Sun Young will get during a career that stretches over 40 years. It's clear by the way that he plays the smooth-talking, conniving, obsequious clerk that he never really got to shine, never got a chance to shine, and that the only roles he could get after this were parodies of what make white moviegoers thought Asians were like. Race was the real movie code, not how much sex could be shown. 2 years earlier, Sen Young made a film debut as Jimmy Chan, number 2 son, Charlie Chan in Honolulu, 1938, ostensibly replacing number 1 son, who was played by Keith Luke. Between 1938 and 42, Young played Jimmy Chan 11 times. This is the best an Asian American actor could hope for, a recurring bit part as a comedic character playing a racist stereotype in a TV series. Between 1959 and 73, Young played the easygoing cook Hop Sing in the TV series Bonanza. This, of course, is all China could do in the movies and the TV series. Cook, hop, sing, jump, die. Because of Bonanza, the name Hop Sing has become synonymous with stupid Chinaman. In the martial arts film Best of the Best 1989, stars James Earl Jones. One of the fighters, Travis Bickly, played by Christopher Pratt, says, "Raw fish. You keep eating that shit, you'll end up like Hop Sing over there. Your eyes will slant, your dick will shrink up, and you'll open up a laundry." During his career, Sen Young was also known as Sen Young, Victor Sen Young, and Victor Young. He is buried at Greenlawn Memorial Park, Coleman, California. most likely under the name Baker said no. Okay.
Thank you all, that was so sick. I've been like so excited for this for months. I don't know, there's a couple minutes, we have a couple minutes if anyone has any, if you guys have any questions for each other or any questions, but also just thank you all for coming. Ed.
I forgot to say something about poetry and film. So I guess I'm just kind of going off my brain right now, but poetry and film, memory, assemblage, and process.
Pretty good. Okay, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.